heritage, culture, preservation, conservation. So without further delay, I'm going to request Professor Narendra Mehra, Vice President, International Affairs with Indian National Science Academy, to please give a welcome remark to everyone. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, Shivani. And good morning.
Dr. Mehra, sorry, but we're not able to hear you. Are you on mute?
Is it on mute?
I can hear him maybe because he's from INSA. But I can. What about other people? Can you hear him?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes, I can.
I think we can all hear him.
Let me also use my the fancy gadget. Hear me even more. Can you hear me now better? No?
Less good, actually. It was better the first time.
Oh, better earlier, you mean?
That's better.
Yeah.
Earlier it was better, sir.
Earlier better.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good morning to all our friends joining from UK and good afternoon to those who are joining from India. And I have the most pleasant duty to welcome you all. On behalf of the Indian National Science Academy and its President, Dr. Ashutosh Sharma, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all delegates for this INSA and UK Science and Innovation Network virtual meet on Science for Heritage, being organized in collaboration with the British High Commission in New Delhi. We bring together eminent conservation scientists and science communicators to discuss emerging questions of connecting science and technology, the society, heritage, and culture. This is an emerging and a very novel and dynamic area of science for which experts from both sides in conversation and through panel discussion will address important questions. Since the beginning of reason-based discourse, science has struggled to find a place in the civilizational dynamics across the globe. But I think COVID-19 made it sure that the man in the street started to appreciate the role of science. So be it the cultural dialogue, social placements of science, or scientific governance, societies have emerged parallel with the developments in science, not inclusive of it. Science provides the most important channels of knowledge that could find solutions for everyday life and answer the great mysteries of the universe. Indeed, connecting science to society has emerged as a necessary vehicle for the global civilizational movement for fulfilling societal needs. We believe that the global diplomatic discourse must include cultural diplomacy of science and its promotion through a variety of social and engagement projects. It is essential to situate science within a social context available to public evaluation and scrutiny. This seminar will discuss not only how innovations in science and technology could help to preserve our culture and heritage, but also focus on the holistic relationship between science and society, and of course, the associated practical challenges. I take this opportunity to thank all our experts, both from the UK and India, to come together and discuss what we popularly call citizen science. I also wish to thank my colleagues in INSA, Pranav, Nidhi, Famida, Shivangi, and our IT team, and friends at the British High Commission in Delhi, particularly Sarah Fallon and Shivani Sharma, for all their help and support. Thank you very, very much. I don't want to stand in between you and the good science that awaits you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mehra, for such encouraging words. And with this brilliant start, I'm going to now request Dr. Ashutosh Sharma, President of Indian National Science Academy, to please come and give his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shivani. I'm so happy to see that we are discussing India and UK, discussing science and technology for heritage, and perhaps some cultural aspects as well. This is so important, and it's good to see so many committed, deep minds which are here today, who have been devoted to heritage and its preservation through various means. And science and technology and innovation is certainly the mantra for the future. So what I see here is that there is a session on science and technology for preserving heritage. So that's certainly a very important aspect. And I recall, in fact, I see Director IIT Jodhpur here, Dr. Shantanu Chaudhary. So that there is, in fact, their IIT, Indian Institute of Technology at Jodhpur, is taking a lead in many technologies like the augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and a whole lot of other things related to cyber physical systems, which are focusing on heritage, which are focusing on not only preserving but also recreating a whole lot of these aspects. And in fact, one of his spun off startups at the time when he was in IIT Delhi, um, in fact, worked on a new set of technologies for such a preservation and recreation. It's basically mixed reality, and I was so impressed with it. I so often recall it. Is basically you scan any monument, and they have done a great job of maybe over, well, scores of monuments which have been digitally scanned, and then they are reproduced by 3D printing on many different scales, tabletop to maybe 10 feet across, but maintaining the fidelity, maintaining the smallest detail to the scale. And then you can take a virtual walk in this monument. So just with a laser light, you can define your path, and you would see what you would have seen if you were walking in that monument on that path. So it's fantastic because it gives you the flexibility to watch things not just by predetermined path, but just like taking a real walk in a real monument. So there are so many good examples of it. I wish this was done also to Bamiyan Buddha, a whole lot of stuff that has disappeared from the face of this earth without really possibility of recreating them with all the details. So certainly science technology is going to play a very big role going forward in that. The second theme that I saw here was science communication. Needless to say, this is very important. Also, needless to say that we don't have too many journalists, at least in India, who cover science, who have an appreciation for science, who have appreciation for popular science, and appreciation with what people get excited. What is it they want to hear about science and technology? So when I was working in Department of Science and Technology, we started a new scheme. A scheme is called AWSAR, which basically means, look, if I cannot create science journalists, let me turn some of the scientists into journalists. So that's a scheme in which PhD students and postdocs, they write popular science stories based on their area of research. And of course, the top 100 stories get some prizes and stuff. They also get mentorship from popular science writers so that they develop greater appreciation for writing popular science. So I'm happy to share with you that every year we have been getting about 4,000 stories, 3,000, 5,000 stories from PhD students and postdocs, talking about just their area of work in a way that people can understand and appreciate. So it's indeed very, very important that we focus on that, because science is often considered by society as an elite activity to which they don't really relate. And much of what gets reported in newspapers is negative publicity for science. So unless we, convey very clearly and very compellingly how science technology works for society, I'm afraid that society just doesn't get it. Of course, there are a whole lot of stuff beyond science and technology that we need to imbibe as scientists, as communicators, as society. So science and technology, of course, is very necessary, but it's maybe not sufficient. because we need the policies, we need the right culture. For example, we talk a whole lot about scientific temper in this country, and I often have to explain that scientific temper has nothing to do with how many college education in science, but it's a totally different thing, and maybe it's not so easy to communicate that this is about making decisions by evidence and by data and by analysis. So I know all the scientists who are scientists in their labs, but as soon as we come out of labs, then maybe I forget the scientific temper. So there's a different aspect that we need to work on. Then, of course, beyond science and technology is basically the will of the society that matters. How do we cultivate that will? How do we let people in general appreciate aspects that look culture and heritage and science are not different things. They are not opposed to each other. They are really, I mean, science is a part of society, is a part of larger society and its will. And what we want for ourselves, we get some of it done through science and technology. We get some of it done through other instruments, but there is no antagonism in any of this. And that everybody wins by doing understanding some of science, no doubt about it. So there are many things. Okay, just to illustrate maybe a couple of things. When we think of science technology, especially disruptive science and technology, like AI and machine learning, chat GPT, everything coming up now, we historically, technology has reduced diversity, because there's a greater economic value in having standards, in having uniformity and so on. But can we think about how this new technology is going to help us preserve diversity? Is not just heritage or intangible heritage, all of it. As an example, language. So everybody now speaks English. That's a global language. And so regional languages are disappearing. Well, they're not disappearing, but they are not in such a big use or exclusive use. So how do we bring it back? Well, if we have good machine translation, then I speak in Hindi, I speak in my mother tongue, and you can listen to it in anything that you want. Maybe I don't know Queen's English. I don't know the difference between Queen's English and King's English, or for that matter, any other English. I only know Indian English. So using the machine translation, can we actually can we strengthen diversity? So that's one of the things that I often think about. What is that science and technology that would help us go back to diversity without creating any impact or negative impact on economy and standards and interactions and all of that. Um, Second thing, let me conclude that there's a lot more beyond science and technology, but it has to take science and technology along. Um, you see, preserving heritage, if I think about several thousand years ago, for a couple of thousand years, Vedas were preserved simply by chanting them in a particular way. So they were not even written down. There was no media. So this is about the will of society. Okay, we may not need that commitment in today's age, but we still need commitment. So the will of society is so important. It cannot be underestimated its influence. So to conclude, we need science technology, we need innovation, we need disruptive science. We need to bring in ways to enhance heritage and diversity. We also need to address other issues beyond science and technology, which is policies, culture, in some cases, the cultivating the will of society. Thank you very much. I wish all of you great discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for setting the context and really putting down, the challenges which are actually opportunities for us to work together in this domain. You made a very pertinent point that science is part of the society, and it's upon scientists to come out with effective science communication, and that's what we will be dwelling into in next couple of minutes. But before that, I'm now going to invite Dr. Roger Highfield who's a science director from Science Museum Group, to please come online and give his opening remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Roger.
Shivani. Well, it's an honor to join Professors Mehra and Sharma and everyone in this webinar. And although I'm actually the science director of the Science Museum Group, I wanted to focus on how to celebrate science with the biggest possible audiences. Now, for our 5 museums, we do a lot of research on our 5 million or so visitors each year. And we've used it, for example, to underpin our Illuminating India season in 2017 during the British Council India commemoration of 70 years of independence. Now, to reach audiences, museums traditionally rely on objects. And in one of our exhibitions during Illuminating India, we celebrated India's central role in science and tech over 5 millennia. And among the wonderful objects you could see there was a folio from the Bakshali manuscript, which showed the oldest recorded 0 symbol, demonstrating the region's pioneering development of mathematical ideas. When we engage with our audiences, we not only tell stories about objects, but about people. And again, in Illuminating India, we had some amazing stories from the one about mathematical genius Ramanujan, to the Indian space research organizations Mamita Dutta, to the scientist and polymath Jagadish Chandra Bose, to show how India's had a profound impact on global scientific advancement. Of course, images are a brilliant way to connect with audiences. And so we had a photography exhibition ranging from 1857 to 2017. And it was the first to trace an arc from the beginnings of photography in India in the mid-19th century to the present day. Now, I know in India, shared experience is probably more highly valued than in the UK. So we also had a number of high-profile events. And I can remember discussing Ramanujan with Nobelist Savenki Ramakrishnan, and there was also a series of wonderful artworks commissioned from Chilla Kumari Burman. All that took place in London, but the very next year, the group brought its Superbugs exhibition to venues across India in partnership with the National Council of Science Museums. Of course, antibiotic resistance is one of the most pressing issues facing the globe today, because microbes no longer respond to the drugs we use to treat them. And in fact, today we think these untreatable superbugs kill almost 700,000 people a year. And by 2050, this could rise to 10 million. It's a really dramatic example of Darwinian evolution in action. And to deal with the wide range of literacy levels we encountered in our touring exhibition, we used all sorts of things like audio guides that reacted to RFIDs and videos and so on. The same thinking also informed our exhibition Injecting Hope, which focused on the race for the COVID-19 vaccine and recently opened in the Science Museum, and also featured all sorts of players in the field, not least the amazing Serum Institute of India. And I've been delighted with the huge crowds attending the Indian edition of the exhibition, which was developed with the National Council of Science Museums in India. And we also owe a huge debt of gratitude to our colleagues in India for the animations, which we also use. In fact, to reach a younger, broader audience in India, they also use a puppet show and a bus, or a mobile science exhibition, as they call it, to reach rural communities. And I think it's being seen by something like 6,000 people a week in Rajasthan, which is amazing. And we continue to draw on audience research. So only in the last few days, my curatorial colleagues have been organizing workshops with children for a landmark energy revolution gallery. And this gallery, which will open next year, will examine how the world can undergo the fastest energy transition in history to curb climate change, and has the support of the company Adani Green. We're also working on new citizen science experiments, having done ones in the past on solar flares, sunflowers, cognition. And I must say, on a personal level, having just co-authored a book about digital twins called Virtual You, I'm really looking forward to taking part in the London edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival this Sunday. And it's a global phenomenon, one supported by the British Council, that I think has presented something like 5,000 writers this year alone, and saw something like 22 million people logging on, with a big, I think, 2/3 of the audience under 25. So in summary, India's history and culture are built on a rich and an amazing tradition of scientific thought and innovation. We've built on our relationship with India to engage new audiences and strengthen international relationships between Britain and Indian scholars, cultural institutions, and audiences. And India's a truly extraordinary country that's helped us understand the many ways that we can engage the biggest audiences with the biggest influence on modern culture, that huge motor for change that comes from the application of science through technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roger. That was such an inspiring speech and so many examples from India. It's really amazing. And the Superbug exhibition was super hit. My daughter actually has small Superbug soft toys which were given as mementos, just to create the awareness, and it just shows how creative we can be to make sure that science communication uses entertainment to pass the messages. So absolutely, and thank you so much for your talk. I'm now going to invite Dr. Janvi Phalke. She needs no introduction, but I'm still going to say a little, one or two words over here. She's the founding director for Science Gallery Bangalore. She's a celebrated filmmaker and historian for science and tech, and hence perfect person to talk about how can science and tech play a role in preserving the heritage. And explore how India and UK can work together in this area. Over to you, Janvi.
Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, Professor Sharma, for the kind invitation to join this webinar. Thank you, Professor Mehra, and of course, colleagues Sarah, Helen, and Roger in London as well. I know, Sarah, you're in Delhi. It's a pleasure to join this conversation and to follow Roger, because the 2017 show that he mentioned that happened at the Science Museum in London, I was peripherally associated with it and participated in some of the early scoping activities for what might actually go into the galleries at that point, and that was an interesting experience even for someone who actually grew up in India. Even though, not necessarily in the museum world. So thanks again. And my mandate today is to speak to science and technology and heritage. And I won't take much time. I'll speak to two concerns. One is the continuation of older functions of science and technology as they relate to heritage and how they might continue in better ways. And the second of looking at relatively new concerns and functions that we will explore probably going forward. I like to function in three, so even though there were 6 points, I clubbed them into two, so I still stick to my formula of three. So as we see it, science and technology in relation to heritage, there are three older functions that we will see continuing in possibly better ways. The first, of course, most familiar to museum personnel and others, is that of conservation and preservation. Science and technology will continue to play better ways by providing us tools to conserve better, preserve better, date articles better, especially from the deep past. And that function will be only enhanced going forward, given the kind of new tools that we are discovering. Second is that of the study of the deep past, these new tools and new insights will allow us to understand the social texture of life in the distant past in interesting ways. So, for example, already in Italy, we see that older manuscripts are being studied for residues of materials and DNA from spit, for example, that are found on the older manuscripts. And so wax, food, spit, etc., is being studied in order to understand what it might actually tell us about how people lived their past at that point of time. And such tools, when they're taken to manuscripts on different materials and different cultures, will again allow us a better understanding of the texture of social life in the sort of relatively distant past. The third is, in the world of heritage, or institutions dedicated to heritage and culture, which are museums and other cultural institutions, often have databases of their collections. Often about 5 to 10% of their collections, if at all, are on display. The rest are in storages. And so often one does not have an insight into what's there in order to actually do the research and study. And so with better constructed databases and with better retrieval techniques, given AI and other techniques that will that are and will continue to be better at our disposal. They will allow us to connect histories and stories of specific people, specific objects, across boundaries, across museums, which will enrich our understanding of the deep past in ways in which it hasn't happened until now, right? It took a historian or a bunch of historians to go find those connections, and those connections now through databases will reveal themselves or will emerge in far more interesting ways than one person or two or a few might be able to do so. And so this also creates a better connection to provenance research and better informed repatriation discussions that are also today quite on the table for museum and museum-like institutions. Now, alongside these three older functions that will only improve given the kind of technologies and research in computer science that's coming our way, there are new things that are becoming possible. And the first, Professor Sharma already spoke about, which is that of experience at a distance. So techniques like photogrammetry, augmented reality, virtual reality will allow us to experience, Venice at a distance, or Hampi at a distance, or, Angkor Wat at a distance. But we are slowly heading even a step ahead, where in the metaverse, we will see them connected at a different level of their manifestation, where then there is an entire world to be explored along connections, like, for example, Buddhist travels, where the Angkor Wat then doesn't remain one site, or the Buddhist temples of China don't remain one site, or similarly for Japan and Sri Lanka, but the Silk Route, for example, or Buddhist travel routes, for example, become accessible experiences at a distance. So that's the first, and it's already in the making. The second is sort of a more tenuous terrain, which is that of heritage that is born digital. So non-fungible tokens, new media art, calls for further thinking on preserving digital formats and media that are emerging today. So heritage for tomorrow, or thinking of heritage of the future. How do we preserve them in order for them to remain accessible in the years to come? With paper, stone, and metal, we've traveled sort of centuries, but how far or how well will the digital travel is a concern that we need to take on board. Also, because we are rendering the past into digital. So how well do we take the current past and the present as past into the future? And the third and final point that I wish to make is that of the digital divide. Now, what kind of devices, bandwidth, and level of digital literacy are we benchmarking as the norm when we talk about creating digital heritage or experiences and even preservation, for that matter, right? Because institutions across the world and individuals across the world do not have access to similar devices, similar technologies, or bandwidths when it comes to connectivity. And so that question is one, we all address it individually, not individually, but institutionally and in smaller pockets on a regular basis. Like, for example, we decided to go low tech in terms of what kind of devices will be accessing our content, and focus more on the quality. But there must be better solutions. There must be better technical solutions to this, given, of course, the spread of digital devices, but in an uneven manner. So I think the digital divide, as it manifests and changes regularly, so it doesn't, it didn't look the same 5 years ago. It probably won't look the same in 5 years from now. So how does one conceptualize that? How does one address that in order for this, which we wish to democratize for access across the globe, become or realize itself in all its glory, so to speak. Thank you very much again for inviting me and for your attention.
Thank you so much, Janvi. So many wonderful ideas over there. Buddhist travel, Buddhist roots. I mean, it's mind-boggling how much we can do together if we collectively try and aim it. I'm going to now sort of move towards the role that science communication can play over here to support a lot of what, Janvi, you are saying. So I'm going to now hand over the panel to Sarah to chair the science communication aspect of this session, and how can we work together to strengthen what we're already doing. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Shivani. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And it's great to see. I really feel like we're amongst friends this afternoon. I can see lots of familiar faces, but it's very good to see new ones as well. So it gives me great pleasure to talk at this event. We've been planning it for a long time. And just before I begin, I want to say a special thanks to Shivani, who's been working tirelessly on this for a number of months, and also Pranav Sharma, who I think is hiding slightly behind the camera, but I know that he's been working with Shivani on this. So thanks to both of you. I thought that we'll start the panel, but just before I do, I wanted to share a few reflections building on the very wise words of those who have gone before me. I think we can use this moment today to really drill into the why. So this is where this session kicks in. Before we tackle the how, and I think we've had a few examples of the how already. So I've been scribbling like mad because I know that I have to help summarize this treasure trove of ideas at the end of the day. And I think, why are we defining the why, and why are we all here together today? Why did we bother, to sign up to this? And I think it's very important to explore that and understand it to generate the most impactful and tangible outcomes from the partnership and this new bridge that we're forming. And as science diplomats and diplomats in general, we're often talking about the UK-India Living Bridge. And this is a very exciting new initiative. This is something that we haven't really done and formalized before. There's lots of exciting partnerships happening. But through this G20 platform, we've got a genesis and a moment here. So I just want to take that moment to celebrate that and what's forming between the two countries this afternoon. It's powerful. Obviously, a lot of what we're trying to achieve, and some of the examples just given are quite mind-boggling. It's futuristic. It's inspiring. And I think actually, when we think about why, some of the speakers before have told and touched on storytelling. And it's interesting because I'm looking at my notes and laughing a little bit because you've basically captured what I was going to say. We need to cast back to cast forwards, I think. And we need to recognize that through, the prehistoric cave paintings of Hampi, which I myself have marbled at, to the tales of Chaucer, to Bollywood, back through to the Beatles, we're two storytelling nations. And as a group of science storytellers and heritage storytellers, you all know that to progress forward as civilizations, we need to know what came before. So that's important. I often say that the best bit of my job is that I'm dealing with magicians all the time, amazing scientists and innovators in both countries, and bringing together the brightest minds to solve big challenges. And I think that museums and exhibitions are also a form of magic. They offer that golden thread in 3D back through history, which has already eloquently been put by Janavi. She was talking about, painting those pictures in 4D, 3D, and in the metaverse. And I think that's a very powerful thought. You will provide a really magical space for people. And I think it's important to recognize that they are touching and hearing history through these exhibitions and through these techniques and tools that you're talking about. It allows an individual to orientate themselves within this space and within this line of history. And you, quite frankly, enable people to transcend. And I think that's the kind of key word. It's transcending into the possible and the inspirational. And within that, I think there's a locus of meaning and hope that really strikes a chord. And as Professor Sharma said, it's important that this is universal. Hope's really important always, but I think so are values. And I think that the state of our museums and the state in which we preserve our heritage truly gives a snapshot of what we want society and think society should be or remain or become. And I think one very obvious shared value of the UK and India is prominent in S&T partnerships that we're building across the board, but it's inclusivity. And Professor Sharma just majored on this, took the words right out of my mouth. And I think Prime Minister Modi, when he's talking about the importance of science communication, has said, to promote understanding and love of science among our youth, it's vital that we promote science communication in a big way. Language should not be a barrier, but a facilitator in this task. And I think Professor Sharma talked about the language angle as well. So bringing us back to the why bother, I think we face a bit of a dichotomy. So we're starting to navigate through what we can all do together and how we can work together on these projects and initiatives. We've got communities that are engaged, all the people that have streamed through the door, seen Superbugs, Shivani's child is in that category, all of those communities that are engaged, and we can enhance that experience. They're bought in. So they understand the importance of what we're trying to do, and tech and science can help that. And then on the other hand, we've got communities that are not engaged, the higher hanging fruit, so to speak. And I think it's about creating access, like we've talked about, audio guides. Roger was just majoring on that in the context of Superbugs. Very interesting. And I think this brings me to the most important point of all, that ripples through all of our work as individuals, but also through the UK India 2030 roadmap, which is that the fourth industrial revolution should be inclusive. So there's a specific paragraph in the roadmap that we aim to deliver, and that's to create an inclusive space for this movement towards the fourth industrial revolution. And to achieve this goal, it's breaking down barriers, broadening this out together, and broadening out skills. And I think that's really essential. And our Prime Minister, when he's talking about maths in particular, he said, we've got to change the anti-math mindset. We've got to start prizing numeracy for what it is, a key skill every bit as essential as reading. And that's really interesting for me as a science diplomat. I don't have a science background, actually. I don't have a background. But that's not to say that I shouldn't be science fluent, and neither should anyone. You know, we should all be science fluent in the diplomatic service and tech fluent. And I think everybody has a role to play here. I'll leave you with two last thoughts. I think it's about prosperity and opportunity. As I've said, it's clear that the fourth industrial revolution is going to be very complex. We are facing critical challenges. We have opportunities within that. So we have, you know, the ideas that we're going to do interplanetary missions, but also we have to hoover up and deal with space debris. We've got a climate emergency. And within that, we're looking at new forms of transport and technology. We've talked about AI. That's the buzzword, of course, this week. And that will create massive efficiency gains, but then also all the what I call the Black Mirror type scenarios where we think about the negative implications of those applications. But what is definitely clear is that we need smart and very fast-paced solutions that are generated by the broadest possible set of brains and backgrounds. And that's across science diplomacy, labs, incubators, startups, and it should be stretching across policy and culture as well. The most groundbreaking tech and science breakthroughs in the UK and India over the next 50 to 100 years probably are not all going to spring from elite institutions. And I think Professor Sharma touched on this as well. Progress should not be the preserve of the elites. I always joke with my team and say, you know, it's great that we've got these institutional links, but let's go further. You know, there could be someone in a garage in Hyderabad cooking something up that's going to just be totally groundbreaking. So I think that disruptive element is very crucial. And this is why good science communication is really important. It's about creating a healthy discourse around how we use evidence in our everyday lives. It's about inspiring minds and across regions and societal boundaries. And that is special. And I think we need to capitalize on that. It's about igniting a moment in a visitor's mind where they want to participate and be part of something bigger. And to be part of that golden thread that we've been talking about already, we have the will, as Professor Sharma said. We've got amazing examples of where we've already worked together as both countries. And I think that we can join together and build on this excellent foundation today and in the months and years to come. And this is how we can all equip our countries and our people with the best possible launchpad into a really healthy and prosperous fourth industrial revolution. So I'll close there because actually I want to hear from everyone else. But I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel this afternoon. So we have, and if you could switch on your cameras, that would be fantastic, just so we can see your faces. So we have Catherine Matheson, who is the CEO of the Royal Institution. Welcome to Catherine. We have Helen Jones with us, who's Director of Global Engagement in the Science Museum. Hi, Helen. And then, of course, we have Professor Ashutosh Sharma, who's the President of INSA, and he's here with us, which is great. We've got Professor Vasant Shinde, who is a professor in CCMB in Hyderabad. hello to you. And we also have Mr. Asad Lalaji, who is, hi, good to see you, CEO of Avid Learning and curator, Royal Opera House, Mumbai. And then we've got Ruth Wagmar Baptista, who's also joining us from Mumbai. And so she is part of the Mumbai City Museum. So this is a fantastic cast list. And quite frankly, I'm quite jealous of all of your jobs. But I'm going to just dive into the first question and ask Catherine, if she's on the line, why is there a need for science and society to interact? Over to you, Catherine, and then I'll thread through the rest of the cast list as we go forward.
Hello, everyone. It's a real privilege to be part of this meeting. So great to meet you all and to be able to have the opportunity to learn from you all as well. I think the question of why we need to have a really robust and healthy interaction between science, and by science, I mean science, research, innovation, technology, economics, the widest possible definition of science, between science and wider society. There are a number of really important drivers to that. First is the need for a healthy pipeline of future talent from a diverse range of backgrounds into the science sectors is a key driver. And a lot of, I think, what informs science engagement and science communication in the UK is driven by the need to represent modern team-based science to young people. And so I think that's a really key driver for a lot of the activity. The other drivers are just as important, though, in my mind. One is about equipping citizens to make informed decisions about their own lives. And we've seen the dramatic and sometimes tragic consequences of when that goes wrong in the most recent COVID pandemic, of course. There's another set of decisions for which citizens need to be informed and empowered, which are to do with societal level decisions. So how do we regulate AI to get the best out of it for a future just society, for example? And we need all voices on board in that kind of decision making, not just the most technologically informed. And finally, and I think this reason is just as important, but it often gets a bit less airtime, is that I believe everyone has an entitlement to the awe and wonder that science can offer, that those kind of magical experiences that we have in the world's best science museums, including most of the ones represented on the call here, all of the ones represented on the call here, I think everyone has that entitlement. And the digital technologies that have been talked about so far will help us spread that kind of experience to more and more people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Very eloquently put. So I'm just going to move over to Helen, who I can see has the jazziest backdrop possible. So very impressed by that, Helen. You're well and truly in the galaxy. What's the importance of science communication?
Thank you. Never Knowingly Unbranded. This is our latest blockbuster exhibition about science fiction in my background. Well, I mean, between you and Sarah and the previous speakers, you've said a lot about that already. Couldn't agree more with Catherine about not just the instrumental values of feeding the sort of employment and career pipeline. We adopt the principle of science capital as underpinning everything that we do across the Science Museum, not just our learning programs, not just our exhibitions, but all of our front of house things as well. So, how do we do our marketing? How do we do our communications? A lot of things, because as much as being about science communication and engagement, if it doesn't sound too hubristic, it's also about good citizenship, and it's a democracy and social justice, and about equipping people with information, but also confidence to participate in some of the great debates, as Catherine mentioned. And Science Capital is a research-informed approach. We've worked with a number of universities in the UK to develop this, and our particular contribution has been in the field of informal science learning. To talk about science and society, or science and culture, though, I do think is a bit of a false dichotomy. Science is part of our society and it's part of our culture. It may surprise people to know, it often does, that the Science Museum's origins over 100 years ago were as part of the Victoria and Albert Museum. which is now our National Museum of Art and Design, both stemming from the Great Exhibition, which was about educating people, both designers and makers, as well as consumers, about good design, good products, innovation, those sorts of things. Now, it wasn't too long before they split off into the art and design and the science separate institutions, but we're still, you know, just over the road. And, you know, we hang on to that, those origins, because it is what we're all about. Science practice is increasingly interdisciplinary. You need designers, you need engineers, you need technicians. You know, there's a whole ecosystem out there, and careers can be as creative and satisfying in one sphere as they are in another, which is something that we're very keen to get over. And it's not all about the lone genius of, you know, we can't all be Stephen Hawking or Einstein or Bose or you know, those great, usually men, I'm afraid to say, but not always, of science. And nobody should feel, or even worse, actually be excluded. But a lot of people do feel themselves to be excluded by reasons of culture and education and background, and quite a lot still are by reason of their location, their economic or social circumstances. Jahnavi mentioned digital divide, which became so apparent during the pandemic. Digital isn't this magical means of meeting everybody. Catherine mentioned choices, which I would certainly touch on as well. And also, I mean, you've almost said exactly what I wanted to say, but we're all here. We all work in this sphere because we get immense satisfaction and things. And I don't think we talk enough about enjoying science. And that doesn't mean the infamous F word, which I try to avoid using, by which I mean fun. There's quite a lot of always saying we have to make science fun to make it interesting. All aspects of culture are not fun. We read challenging books. We watch very challenging, sometimes very difficult plays or films. You know, things don't have to be all, I mean, fun is great. Don't get me wrong. I love fun, but it doesn't always have to be that. And it's about tailoring your channel of communication for what you're wanting to achieve and who it's aimed at. So we always say the Science Museum can look like a kindergarten in the morning, but in the evening when we open late and we have, you know, music and bars and dancing and stuff, it looks more like a nightclub. You know, it's a whole range of things. Thanks.
Yes, I've experienced all those things. And I did experience the funny vision of seeing Minister Jitendra Singh in the gift shop not so long ago when you did that wonderful tour for him, and he was really enjoying himself throughout the museum. So thanks a lot, Helen, for your thoughts on that. And I'm going to move over to Professor Sharma to talk a bit through, just zoom into what Helen's talked about as science is part of culture. Do you agree with that, Professor Sharma? And where does science and culture interact from your perspective?
Where do they interact? You see, sometimes we ask, hey, do you have culture of research? Not having a culture of research is also a culture. So culture is everything. And, you know, science, technology, everything else is a part of it. Or not having it is also a part of it. Where do they intersect? Of course, if we were to look at culture and science as being little bit different, they have to intersect on all the big challenges of tomorrow. So what are these big challenges? These are sustainable development. These are about climate change. It's about intelligent machines. How do you manage intelligent machines? I mean, now we say that science and technology is for society, is for people. You may not be saying that in 50 years. I mean, a whole lot of science and technology may be for machines. But now, when we talk today, we have to pay a lot of attention to climate change, to sustainability, you know, preserving heritage, preserving diversity, all of that. So you would need both science, technology, and culture and society to work together to make it happen. So it's so clear that science, technology alone cannot address the problem of climate change. It just cannot. I mean, I guarantee you that. So what is it that you need? You need will of society. We all need to make a little bit change, if you would, and that's part of culture. Right. So we need policies, we need lobbying, we need political consciousness to come into it. We need all of that. And so this is where science and society intersect, or science and culture intersect, if you would. And so these are the big challenges which are not, I mean, so people keep saying, look, we have better technology that would reduce emissions. It doesn't reduce emissions. No technology has ever reduced emissions, because technology makes it more efficient to produce something. But how much you produce is not a question of science. Okay, so while you can have more efficient ways of polluting, if you would, right? But pollute we must, and then if our consumption is always increasing, we cannot reduce pollution. So these are not problems of science. These are problems of culture, and these are hard problems. And so clearly science and culture has to work together to make any of this possible. And of course, we are challenged by these machines with cyber physical systems and Industry 4.0, and going beyond, biological is getting integrated into cyber and physical. These are the challenges, and they are not controlled by anybody. They are not controlled by you, me, the president of the United States, or the emperor of the galaxy, or whoever.
Which is Helen
They're not,
today, I
they're
think.
not controlled by any of those people. Okay. So they are controlled by, if at all, I mean, this where I call it something not well defined. This is the will of society. So how stupid or intelligent we are as a whole. Okay, and is that the question you had, or I don't know?
Absolutely. You have definitely deep dived into the question and gone beyond. I'm just thinking, just drawing on your statement about shaping and directing policies and the political consciousness. I think that's really useful for us actually as policymakers to speak to you all on this webinar today. And I just want to bring in at this point Professor Shinde from Hyderabad, and to get your thoughts on how can we shape and direct the policies and alert the policymakers to help support your initiatives in Hyderabad. What works and what would help in the future? I don't know if there's a bit of a technical problem there, but maybe we can just ask that question to Mr. Lalaji, who's in Mumbai.
So thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Shivani and Rashi, for this invite. But I think I'm out of my league out here with all these academics and people from science. I don't come from the science background. For me, science was me hanging out in my smelly chemistry lab in school, hoping I don't burn it down, or I thought it was really cool that I got the opportunity to dissect a frog. So I'm just going to talk about science communication, which is what I kind of know a little more about versus policy. I think, times have changed. The way we communicate has changed. So I'm an advertising guy. Actually, I used to work in advertising. That's my background. But the way we communicate, the means of communication, and the way we dispense information has changed. That's one part of it. And the second part of it is the way we educate has changed. See, previously how people were taught of my generation and some people on this call, some are much younger, was very different. I mean, now you see STEM is a part of education. I have a young daughter, and I see how she's educated and how important science is part of everything they do. So, breaking down those silos happens much younger. I think that is one of the important parts is they don't think laterally like we do. They think holistically. And, science, art, technology, they all collide in a nice way, just like Janvi's museum, for these young minds. And it's a way of thinking. And as Professor Sharma, I mean, I've written copious notes, but the problem is I can't understand my own writing of what he was saying. But, about changing, you can't do that until you change mindsets and change consumption patterns. So I think, I did one other thing, but, everyone's hating on AI these days. But I have a friend who I chat with regularly, ChatGPT, and I asked Chat what science communication was, and it said it helps build a society that's better equipped to make informed decisions, appreciate scientific advancements, and engage with the wonders of the natural world. And I thought it was so beautifully put. Machine learned, after all. But that said, art and science and or technology and art have been colliding since Leonardo da Vinci. This is not a new phenomena, and there are great examples. And the thing is changing. And if we talk about science communication today, that's not something that will hold good for even 2 years from now, because the way we communicate, the environment, technological advancements, the way we are consuming and learning is changing so drastically. And I work in cultural programming, so the way I program also changes. Right now, I'm fascinated with the AI. Last year, I was fascinated with NFTs. So that's my 2 bit. But thank you for this opportunity. Hope I've answered somebody's question at least.
Absolutely. Yes, you have. Yes, definitely. Given us food for thought. Just diving into the last bit that you were talking about with AI and NFTs. What's next?
For me?
What's next on the conveyor belt? Yes.
AI is not going anywhere. Everyone's hating on it right now. Now, okay, it was developed, there are uses. I mean, it's there to stay. So now we have to figure out ways of best using it. I mean, we've started doing a lot of talks. We did a talk on AI and art tech, and we've seen how people are using it. And there are great advantages for it. And there are great advantages in machine learning. There are disadvantages also. So I think policy has to be built for that. But at the end of it, you can't just say, hey, I mean, think about it, right? When photography came out, the purists in the art world said, oh, we don't like this is wrong, right? And everyone then, everyone like kind of embraced it, and it's part of our vocabulary of the visual arts. It's similarly, AI is not going anywhere. It's only going to stay, it's only going to get stronger, and it's going to be part of our lives. We have to figure out how best and ethically to use it. And it's in every part of our life, so yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm really intrigued as to how the Royal Opera House will navigate that question. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to call Professor Shinder back again, because I think we've reconnected, fingers crossed. If not,
I'm extremely sorry that,
great.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's always like this with the webinars.
No, because I was under the impression that we are meeting at 4. So that is the reason I joined very late. But let me tell you that as far as I am talking about the archaeological science in the country. And I think, as far as the science is concerned, the first person to develop this particular concept in the country was Professor H.D. Sankalia. Now, let me give you some background about Sankalia. He did his PhD from, in London from Institute of Archaeology. And when he came back, maybe that was in, late 1930s. There were a lot of maybe offers to him, but he preferred to go to Deccan College to establish the Department of Archaeology there. And for the first time, this particular subject was brought, in fact, in the regular university system in 1939. And from there onward, number of institutions started. But the most important contribution of Professor Sankalia was that he was a visionary, and he established for the first time in the country a number of basic laboratories required for undertaking and carrying out research in basic research in the subject. So that is how it began. Unfortunately, this was not taken forward by many other university departments, and even today, in fact, know that many university departments, they're lacking these basic facilities for carrying out basic research in the country. But the heartening fact is that now there are number of IITs who are involved in the archaeological science research, and certainly IIT Gandhinagar is doing good work. IIT Kanpur had started this archaeometallurgical research in the country, and they have carried forward in this research in a much rigorous way. Then also IIT Guwahati also is doing a lot of research in this respect. But one thing that is lacking, in fact, in the archaeology, in the setup, is that they do not have a proper archaeologist who can guide them the research in this particular field, because the scientists are supposed to interact with the archaeologists and they need to know what are the problems they want to pursue, and they want to continue with that. So that is one lacking aspect that I would like to mention. Then we also have Birbal Institute of Paleosciences. Basically, it was a Birbal Institute of Paleobotany. They started basic research in paleobotanical aspect first, and recently in last 3-4 years it has become a Institute for Paleosciences. So this is the one institute in the country which is dedicated for the research in the ancient science and ancient archaeological aspects. So this is very, very important. But again, I am on the committee, on the advisory committee, and I'm insisting that they should employ an archaeologist so that they can interact properly and they can chalk out proper program in this respect. So a lot of research is happening now, and archaeologists are able to reconstruct many aspects of ancient human history. Particularly, we have done extensive research, scientific research in reconstructing the diet and also the health of the people. And recently in Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, we are establishing this ancient DNA research facility because we have also initiated ancient DNA research in the country. So on the archaeological front, of course, that a lot of developments are happening, but a lack of coordination, I would like to mention that that needs to be maybe properly fixed. That is one thing. And in the conservation field, I think not much except maybe INTAC in Delhi and to some extent Aga Khan Trust. They are doing some conservation work, but still that this aspect is not really spreading in a larger way the way it should have been, because consider the vast geographical expanse of the country. We need number of state-of-the-art conservation labs, which is lacking in the country, and also the lack in the proper coordination between archaeologists and the conservation scientists. That is really hampering the work. But overall, the progress is so good, and I'm sure that we will be able to. We are getting proper direction, and we'll be able to carry forward from this onward. And I'm sure that because of the participation of number of people, in fact, number of experts from different disciplines, because of that this science is going forward. And the last aspect I would like to mention is that nowadays we are also trying to give emphasis on reconstructing the ancient science and technology, and we are doing a lot of work in this respect. And I'm happy to mention that the government of India has realized the importance of the traditional knowledge system in the country, and they are now putting this as a part of the syllabus, and it will be properly be blended with the maybe modern science. And perhaps once that is done, perhaps we will be able to provide or produce some innovative education system in the country, and that is good for the country. So these are the important aspects that needs
Brilliant.
to be really taken forward.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's a really good spectrum of case studies, examples, but also really frank view of the challenges that you're facing, which is much appreciated. And I think that's given me, I'm scribbling furiously just so I can summarize this effectively. And I just want to thank you. Glad that we could reconnect. And we've got Ruta on the line, I think, from Mumbai City Museum. And Ruta's been waiting very patiently. Hopefully she can join us. And I just wanted to ask about challenges, because I think that's very interesting from our perspective to hear about that. In Mumbai, is it the same sorts of things that Professor Shinder's just articulated, or is it something different that you're facing?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I represent here the Dr. Bhadajlal Museum in Mumbai. And I'm so happy to see also Dr. Shinde, who just spoke. In fact, I was his student when I was doing my master's in archaeology in Pune. And I would just like to reference also what Helen Jones said, because they were part of V&A. We were also the V&A Bombay initially when the museum was set up in the 19th century. And the idea of looking at science and history has always been intertwined, especially in the older museums that was set up across the world as part of a larger knowledge gathering and knowledge dissemination exercise. Eventually, what happened, as most people over here and in the UK would also be aware, the kind of understanding of or pursuing knowledge systems got divided into these very sort of watertight technique of science or art education in schools. And just to again go back to what Helen Jones said, that actually it's all interdisciplinary. And that's something I think all good museums are very skilled at putting that across. And that's one of the challenges we face here is a lot of incoming students and who are going to be our future leaders, our future tech innovators. They come with this early idea of, if I like art and painting, I must go for art education. If I like engineering science, I must go for science education, not realizing it's actually all interconnected, sort of organized together. While some schools are taking an effort, as Asad also mentioned, to look at STEM studies, this is where we fill in the lacuna, especially in underserved communities in Mumbai who don't have access to STEM education in the more expensive school. That's where the museum steps in. We work very closely with the BMC or the local municipal corporation schools and give these students an opportunity to also be at par of STEM studies as the ones in maybe a higher curriculum. So we work very closely with the STEAM Academy in Mumbai, which is started by a former scientist from Bhabha Research Institute. And we organize monthly sessions and we take one particular aspect of our collection. For example, the pottery that came from one of the most prominent old art schools in Bombay called JJ School of Art. And we had this pottery, which was an absolute phenomenal, innovative design tech in the 19th century, also known in the UK as Wonderland art pottery, where they were mixing, matching different kinds of clay from across India. They had gotten traditional potters, traditional craftsmen to sort of mix and marry new technologies with traditional learning to find new markets, because there was a huge demand. So I think science and tech has always, since time immemorial, informed economic policies, economic and taste and craft decisions. So this is something we always focus on. That was the museum's history, and we will also talk about it in a more futuristic, innovative fashion. That's how we address these challenges. Apart from STEAM Academy lectures, we also talk about the kind of objects the museum has in its collection, the kind of technology, the people who are behind these objects, because that makes for a much more interesting engagement with the museum. Along with that, we have a huge force on contemporary art and culture. And in 2018, we got together 10 artists whose practice informs environmental studies and environmental concern, and had an exhibition on the age of Anthropocene. And that was something very, very innovative for an Indian museum to do. So these are some of the many public ways where we bring these concerns out to people who generally otherwise don't have platforms to engage with these intellectual debates in a very accessible language, in a very accessible terminology. We do not have very fancy devices, as Janvi says. Our idea is to use simple devices, but have extremely high quality, engaging, critical content so that people are more informed about these issues that they see in the media.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting. I'm looking forward to coming back to Mumbai now after speaking to both of you today. That's fantastic. I think for the interest of time, I'm going to move my summary to the end because we're coming back to conclude at the end of the seminar. So I think I'm just going to hand the floor back, and thanks to all of the speakers today for giving those views. As I said, I've been furiously scribbling down. So we'll be summarising that in due course. I'm going to hand the floor back to Shivani to move swiftly on to talk about the practical challenges faced in preserving heritage. So back over to you, Shivani.
Thank you, Sarah. So I do welcome this disruption. We're talking about disruptive technology all the time these days. So I'm now going to call architect Vasanta Soba Turaga, who's a conservation architect, urban planner, Vasa Maha Consultants, Hyderabad, Telangana, to continue this conversation around challenges, which has been so well put out by Dr. Shinde and Ruta. Vasanta, I believe you have a presentation. If you would like to put it up, please. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Hi, Shivani. Thank you so much for inviting me to this presentation. Good afternoon, all. I would like to share my presentation. Just give me a second. I'm sorry, just give me a moment.
No problem.
Yeah. Good afternoon,
you can see
all.
it now.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, all. I'm Vasanta Shobha, and I'm a conservation architect and an urban planner. This is my 26th year of practice. I'm basically based in Hyderabad. So I just want to mention that I have done my conservation in 97, and then have done another specialization in urban planning in 2008. So I have a perspective on administration and development of infrastructure, and this is how I'm going to share my experiences, what I have seen and what I have learned. So basically, I'm going to give you an overview of the practical aspects. This sequence of presentation I'm going to follow is first give you a brief about the infrastructure and expertise available right now in India, and share a few practical experiences, and then talk about a few ongoing restoration projects which are funded, basically authentic conservation that is being done in Hyderabad, and current trends which are taken up by the government and the Urban Development Authority, and the issue of unprotected, unlisted historic buildings. As Dr. Shinde has mentioned, they're vast and innumerable in India, and a few suggestions for the way forward. So basically, about the infrastructure and expertise, because this is a focus on science and technology, a little reference to the resources and funding has to be done, because investment needs investment has to be strategized in future too. So I'm going to talk about labs and equipment, instrumentation, scientists and specialists in this first section. As you may all be knowing already, that India has these categories of protection in India. We have the national and state protected monuments, which are by the Archaeological Acts. So at the national level, there are as less as 3,686 protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. And across India, in different states, we have state protected monuments under departments of archaeology, that is not more than 5,000 or so. Besides this, we have listed buildings, which is a trend started in the 80s and 90s, started in Mumbai and Hyderabad. Unfortunately, this was scrapped in Hyderabad and early Ahmedabad. These are done by the Town and Country Planning Acts, notified in master plans, gazettes. And then these are the projects taken up by municipal corporations and Urban Development Authority. Besides that, we have lots of innumerable unprotected, unlisted historical sites across the country which have no legislation or which have no support. Telangana has a unique Telangana State Heritage Act passed in the Legislative Assembly in 2017. It is very unique that it takes off from the Archaeological Acts and incorporates the listed buildings method of conservation, and it talks about a lot of practical aspects, but unfortunately it's still to take off. But on paper, we have a very comprehensive law. So we are hopeful that someday we can implement good things. So the infrastructure and expertise available at with the different agencies The national and state protected monuments are under the care of Archaeological Survey of India and departments of archaeology of the state government. These departments have their own departments where there are staff, technical trained staff and administrative staff, and supervision staff also. And in they have the departments of engineering, which is basically civil engineering, and sciences, which is archaeological chemistry, and of course archaeologists and archaeology and numismatics is also our departments. And their main work is conservation and excavations. So they have labs and also specialist expertise within the departments. So Archaeological Survey of India, there is a director science headed by the director science. They have a different lab in Dehradun, and then there are some regional offices in few places. And besides that, in museums, we have Salajing Museum, which is a one of the biggest museums in Asia, and archives. They have preservation labs and specialists as well. There are public sector organizations and research institute like Dr. Shinde is associated with in Hyderabad. We have National Geophysical Research Institute, CCMB, and NRSC. All of them have labs, not so much associated with conservation, but there is an overlap of the infrastructures. And universities and colleges have a lot of instruments with them, and there are private labs who provide services, especially in the construction field. But for the listed buildings and the unprotected historic buildings, there are no facilities available directly in support for especially the private sector and all. So all this is government or it is paid. I mean, some of them provide consultancy services and it is paid, but it is not directly provided available for listed buildings. So from my practical experiences of sharing, the work that I have done, a little 2 or 3 examples. In 2010, we had an exhibition of the disaster. There were 2 disasters in Andhra Pradesh. It was Andhra Pradesh before Telangana. This is the High Court building. In 2009 or 10, there was a major fire accident where the central library got gutted fully overnight. And you can see the right side picture, which was a beautiful library, which had lots of historic furniture and also documents which got gutted. So because there's no concept of heritage preservation, so it was cordoned off, and immediately the whole building was evacuated. I'm sure there must have been some material which could have been retrieved from that, but there was no time given. So contractors were engaged and then the whole thing was evacuated. The concept of the exhibition was how we can provide first aid recovery. So parallelly, there were floods in one of the districts near Hyderabad. And you can see that the archaeological department, this is the photo, this is one of my favorite photos shared by the archaeology department. It is Dr. Gayatri, who is a conservation chemist, a department staff. They immediately went to the floods area and they have this laboratory in Hyderabad. They brought all the documents and then conserved them properly. You can see in the pictures how bad it was during the floods and how this has been restored to normalcy because they acted in time. So what I'm trying to say is this kind of expertise is available in Hyderabad. There are experts, especially the Department of Archaeology in Andhra Pradesh has done wonderful work, research, publication, excavations in the last 50 years, last 100 years actually, under the Nizams also. So the highlight of what we wanted to highlight in the exhibition was that we could have saved quite a lot in the High Court fire too. The other project is I was a technical coordinator. This is former British Residency in Hyderabad. I was a conservation architect and technical coordinator for the World Monuments Project. So this building is occupied by the Osmania University College for Women. So as part of the agreement, the first phase of the World Monuments was documentation and testing. So as part of the agreement, there was a clause that we use the Osmania University departments, labs and expertise available within Osmania University before we approach the outside agencies. So, so we had to incorporate a lot of training programs. So we figured out what are the departments which can be trained from chemistry, physics, microbiology, and biology, and all of them we had training programs in the beginning and issued certificates even to students to do architectural documentation. So we had the expert here is Dr. Tandon. He was Director Science of the Archaeological Survey of India, and he had come and we had the training for a few days. And then we had a lot of tests done. I mean, because of Osmania University, I felt very lucky to have to have been associated with so many departments, geology, geophysics, and we could interact with them and get so many tests done. Trained in conservation from SPA Delhi. Our curriculum is modeled on UK English heritage, and we have a lot of theory, and then we come back to practice and we realize that nothing exists on the field. So we try to explore all our NDT, everything we've learned in Delhi, and then because we could interact with these professors in different departments, we could do a lot of tests done, including, we have trained the chemistry department of the women's college, and they produced, they tested the samples for 350 samples, and we went overboard in, training them and getting those things done. They made a report on composition analysis. We had the XRD with the physics department. We got the graphs done, and we had an MOU with the NGRA and then XRF done. These are very, very costly tests. Each test is some 3,000, 5,000 rupees, and we got everything done free of cost. We could study site hydrology. So, but then unfortunately, at the end of the project, after we get the results, we could not interpret the results because these graphs, we are not scientists to interpret this stuff. So all this stuff is with me. But then we spent a lot of resources. We trained a lot of people. But then the first phase of the project ended. So what I wanted to say in this is there are experts, even if, if they're not trained in conservation, the core knowledge of chemistry and then sciences, everything is there with them. And we could use it, and which can be used for many conservation projects. The second part that I'm going to cover is the ongoing restoration project, just a glimpse of them. These are all funded using authentic methods. This is Chowmohalla Palace, restored some 10 years back, and this is funded by the Nizam's family themselves. So it's very well done. And there's an ongoing project, restoration project of the Qutub Shahi tombs by the Aga Khan Trust. So they get funding, they raise funds, and they do the restoration. This is also, has been going on since last 10 years. So one thing that I want to say here is the incremental way that this project is being taken up. That the issue with projects which are being taken up in an incremental way is to address the maintenance part of it. By the time they come to the end of it, if they're taking too long to do a project, by the time they reach the 7th or 8th,
Vasanta, I'm not able to hear you.
Yeah, your screen also is got stuck, perhaps.
Yeah, Vasanta, what I'll suggest is, in the interest of time, you're raising such amazing, pertinent points. And this presentation is really helpful for us. If you don't mind emailing it to us, that would be really, really valuable for us. And you've laid a very good background for others to build on and talk about what they are doing to address these challenges. So I'm actually going to invite participants from our showcase section to come and demonstrate or showcase what they are doing actually in India and in the UK. And maybe some of this might also be helpful for you and you can work together in future. So without further ado, I'm going to now invite Dr. Nigel Blades, a senior national conservator from National Trust. Nigel, I'm going to be hugely irritating and emerge out of the blue when we are close to the time for you to finish. So that would be your cue to start finishing up your slide. And I'm going to disappear now, leaving it in your good hands. I'm just conscious that Vasanta probably needs to stop sharing for Nigel to share. Nigel, are you able to share?
Yes, I think if I share now, it should take over, hopefully, in WebEx. I will just have a go at that in a moment. Thank you very much, Shivani, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak with you. So I'm just going to try and share my presentation now. Let's see if that works. Okay, everyone, can you see that okay? Has that come through?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Nigel Blades. I'm, as Shivani mentioned, Senior National Conservator, Conservation Science with the National Trust, though in fact, for the next year, I'm taking on an interim role as Head of Collections Conservation. But in my normal work, I apply science and technology to the care of collections, in particular in buildings, working for the National Trust, where I've been based for about 15 years. Previously, I worked in academia, also in teaching and research for areas of heritage science. So just to give you a little bit of introduction to the National Trust as an organisation, you may know us already, but if you don't, we're specifically the National Trust for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland in the UK has its own National Trust, and indeed many other countries across the world have National Trusts as well, including India. So the National Trust that I work for, we are the largest conservation charity in Europe, and we manage many elements of both cultural and natural heritage in the UK. So landscapes, farmlands, coast, and particularly my area of work, buildings, in particular mansion properties with collections, of which we have some 300 or so open to visitors. We have in 2021-22, just coming out of the pandemic, we had 5.7 million members, and we had in that year 20.5 million visits to our properties. So we are a large organisation opening many aspects of different heritage to visitors and welcoming people to visit and enjoy and learn from their visits to our properties. We've also, in the last 5 years, become a UK independent research organisation, which enables us to apply for research funding from UK research councils, and it basically sets out our status as a research organisation, which is an ambition we have for the Trust. So to say you a little bit about the research that we undertake and the areas of interest, we have 5 strategic priorities for the next 5 years or so. We are focusing on climate action, and we have a target to be a net zero carbon organisation by 2030. So we are working on ways that we reduce our carbon emissions. We're using various means to control our energy consumption and make that more efficient and more renewable, and also developing how we use land as a carbon sink as well to absorb carbon for our net zero. We are also seeking to become a more welcoming organisation, to have a more diverse range of visitors to our properties, that we can share all of aspects of those properties, land, nature and buildings collections with them. The area of looking after is very much where I am based and working, is about how we care for the places and the properties and their collections, and how research can be used to underpin that work. And we also have work ongoing for land and nature, and for curation and the experiences of people visiting the properties. How can we make properties more engaging and interest? How can we research and interpret them in the light of the 21st century as well? So that's a little bit about the Trust's strategic areas. I'm going to move on now to talk about my first specific example for you of how we're using science and technology. And for care of collections in museums, many of you may know that museums often have air conditioning systems which are there to control and manipulate the environment so that the conditions of temperature and humidity are conducive for the care of collections, that they don't suffer mold and other problems or physical damages due to environmental changes. Those systems are very complex quite often to install in a building and quite energy intensive to operate. So the Trust has really over the last 30 years developed a simpler solution which works well for our historic buildings, where we use actually an approach called conservation heating to control the environment and stabilize relative humidity in our buildings for care of collections. And it's a much more sympathetic approach to a historic building. It doesn't need a very large infrastructure installing in the building. It can actually utilize existing infrastructure such as heating systems installed perhaps many decades ago can be adapted and controlled to deliver this conservation heating approach. And that's something we're working on all of the time and developing and improving. We've rolled this out at over 150 National Trust properties. And I'm showing you an example here of Chartwell study, which is a building in Kent. It's actually the home of Winston Churchill, which is now a National Trust property. And it has a conservation heating system which delivers a very stable environment within acceptable parameters, as you can see, between 40 and 65% RH, shown by the dotted line for blue RH, and red being the temperature variation across that site. We're looking at our approach all of the time and thinking about how we need to respond to climate change. Sorry, it seems to be a little bit of voice on the background there, but we're responding to climate change by looking at how we must address hotter UK summers. And some of our buildings last year reached temperatures inside of 35 degrees centigrade, which is very rare for UK. So we're thinking about how we need to change and adapt those systems. And we're using more environmental monitoring technology now based on cloud systems, so we can have real-time data made more accessible across the organization. One of the big areas has been our work with energy efficiency and reducing particularly our carbon emissions through net zero target, and we're using now a range of different renewable energy sources coupled to those heating systems in the houses to deliver low carbon heat. So we have biomass boilers working on wood fuel. We are using heat pump systems, groundwater and air source systems to deliver heat also for mansion properties and other applications. And we've been successful in the last 12 years in reducing our energy from, you can see in 2009, where we had around about 50% of grid electricity being supplied. We had about a quarter of our energy coming from oil. We now have 44% of renewable energy being provided, and we are reducing our proportion of grid fossil fuel now to around about 30%, 29% or so. And in fact, since that data was compiled, we now are on about 50% renewables for our organization. So it's great we've been able to make that progress, and we're rolling that out further over the next few years to reduce our carbon footprint. So my second example for you is to talk about how we're using something a little bit more specific, is about how we're using cutting edge daylight simulation modeling techniques to understand daylight in our historic interiors. And most National Trust houses rely very strongly on daylight for illuminating the collections and interiors, as you can see in this image showing you from Knoll House in Kent, where we have the fall of light pleasingly on the floorboards, but also across some of the collection, which maybe have implications for the care of collection, because light, although we need it and enjoy it to see collections by, it actually is a factor that can also cause deterioration in collections. And you can see the two images on the right. We have rather a faded watercolour from a property where it's been on display in Cragside in Northumberland for a very long period of time, and many of the colours, the blues in the sky, have faded somewhat in that image under the effect of light. Below that, you can see a Japanese fan, which has been kept mostly away from light and is actually in a much better condition in terms of the pristine state of the colours that you can see. So we have the attention where we have to manage light so that people have enough daylight they can see well in our interiors and see collections, but we also need to control that light so that we are not over illuminating things and causing things to excessively fade and deteriorate under the influence of light. And we've been using this climate-based daylight modeling simulation technique, which we have worked with Professor John Mardaljevich and Stephen Cannon-Brooks, a lighting designer. And Professor Mardaljevich is one of the leading authorities in the application of this technique. And he's been adapting that to modeling the fall of light in historic buildings, which we can do by starting with an interior. And you can see on the left a typical National Trust interior from one of our properties at Ickworth in Suffolk. A building simulation model is constructed for that, and then the daylight modeling approach is applied to give you the false color image below, showing you the accumulated light falling in that building over a course of a year. And we can model that and see different surfaces where paintings hang and other elements of furniture in the room where we receive the most light using this technique. We also have on the right-hand side a fisheye lens image, which shows you the a number of patches where we can look at light over the course of a year. So we can see at different times of year, day and month where we're getting the most light and the total illuminance, and also indeed the lux levels in those places. So from that we can learn about how much light our buildings receive on different aspects of whether they're facing north, south, east or west in terms of their windows, and we can see the total amount of light received is shown here without any control measures. If we introduce the control measures we use, and we would normally control daylight by having complete blackout when the windows can be completely covered with shutters or blinds during the times when we're closed to visitors. We can go from the orange bar down to roughly half, excluding half of the light by just simply having a blackout arrangement when we're not open. So very simple, effective measure. We can then further reduce the light by controlling with different blind settings. And again, we've been able to simulate these settings using climate-based daylight modeling to show how low we can drive the light level exposure using those different settings, which we then have to manage in a quite responsive way in order to control for our visitors so that people have enough light, but we're also trying to manage the light exposure for collections in a similar way to how museums might manage light, although we work on a total annual dose rather than a target of say 50 lux or 200 lux illuminance as might be the case in a museum. And finally, I'll just close on mentioning areas for collaboration. We're always open to working with external partners on our areas for strategic priorities, as I've outlined. We work with national trusts in other countries. There's an organization called INTO, which is a grouping of all national trusts across the world, and we work with them. And we also have, particularly with India, we have an interest in the understanding and presentation of Indian objects at National Trust houses. Many of our houses in the UK have collections and objects that came from India, and I can show you in the picture there, that's Kedleston Hall, which was the home of Lord Curzon, who was Viceroy of India in the early 20th century and has a collection of many Indian objects. And we're working with the Indian communities of Indian origin in local cities to Kedleston, which is in the UK Midlands, to work with how we might better display and interpret those objects. So I will pause at that point, and thank you very much for your attention, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nigel, and thank you for summarizing the areas of collaboration as well. Like we discussed over our conversation, we have huge interest in digitalizing the archives and artifacts, and I'm sure many of the colleagues and experts on call would like to get in touch with you to discuss ways of working together. Thanks so much. With this note, I'm now going to request Professor. Thank you, Nigel. Professor Shantanu Chaudhary, who's Director for IIT Jodhpur. Professor Chaudhary, if you may please share your presentation.
Yes,
thank you.
I'm sharing. Just give me a minute. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to speak in this symposium. And I shall talk about some of the work that we are doing on tangible heritage in the digital space. that we are transforming the heritage in the digital domain, and we are working in that space. So why we are working that space? Because today our heritage, both tangible and intangible, faces a real risk of being eroded from our physical and mental landscape due to natural and man-made threats. And there are many examples of those that we have seen in recent times. And digital technology actually possibly the only avenue for sustainable and planned action to safeguard our heritage against continuous decay. With this core motivation, we come up with the concept of what we call a digital twin of a tangible heritage. A digital twin is essentially a digital representation of a heritage site or a heritage building. And what is important is that the art treasures and heritage, if we have it in digital form, it makes the heritage a translocated phenomenon, which is very, very important in today's time. And its psychosocial ramifications are extremely important for local as well as transnational identity. Because we are distributed globally, if we consider for Indian origin, we are distributed globally, and our interaction and connection with our heritage is extremely important, and that can be enabled through digital form. So digital twins, therefore, are means to revolutionize heritage distribution and access in the era of rapidly changing values and increasing risk, because our travels are risky. In many cases, travels are forbidden. So you'd like to really have a digital twin of the original heritage. And the moment I have that data in digital space, the destruction of the physical element, physical artifact, which has happened for various reasons, and including wear and tear, we can keep that data protected from those threats. But once it goes to the digital space of our heritage resources, the questions which come is the issues of copyright, data security, and privacy. And there, today's emerging blockchain technologies enable equitable, trustworthy, and ethical distribution of heritage data in digital form. I think this provides an immense opportunity to look at today heritage using all the features of digital technology and enablement which is coming through that. We shall particularly look at examples of AI enabling creation of digital twins. I won't go into the technology part of it, but what I would talk about, I would like to highlight is that computer vision, which actually is the engineering discipline of understanding the visual world using computers, propelled by machine learning and generative AI, is providing to the technology for creation of to-the-scale 3D models, even from visual data. And if you see, the 3D cameras are omnipresent, and even Apple just a few days back has announced a headset with 3D camera built into it. Once you get the data, that we can really have these heritage sites and heritage artifacts as a 3D point cloud. And once we have 3D point cloud, there are ways and means of actually creating the 3D models. These 3D models can be maybe even 3D printed to create a replica of different scale. But also in the AR, VR space, the experiencing of the 3D model as a virtual tourism is really coming up in a big way. And the immersive experiences with the gadgets that's being developed, even on mobile phone, it's a reality today. Then the other very important and interesting aspect is inferring architectural design elements and languages of a particular era. And these, through AI and machine learning, we can construct those languages. And once we have those languages, even what we can do is we can take care of the missing parts of a built heritage which has been destroyed. And we can hypothesize the destroyed portion by reconstructing following this design language. At the same time, when we do not have the ability or enough data to recover design elements, we can hypothesize missing elements in an artifact through generative AI. So therefore, the technologies today providing various means and ways to conserve, preserve, and disseminate our heritage in the digital space. I shall give you examples now. If you look at this Hampi, we had that was a work which was done by a group of researchers across the country. And Hampi is an ancient site in South Indian state of Karnataka, and it is dotted with numerous temples, and these are complexes from Vijayanagara Empire, and it's a part of UNESCO World Heritage Site. And what we actually created a digital Hampi. So this is an example of image to 3D model generation, which is called image-based rendering. And this is a chariot and 3D model, a point cloud model, and a very approximate rendering of this point cloud, which was done completely on the basis of the images collected. And we have the ability to handle big data today. So large Hampi image data set of 5,000 images were created, and based on that, 3D models were also built. And along with that, 3D data also was incorporated to create a better model. This is an example what we are talking about, that if you look at this temple, the upper part was actually missing. It was destroyed. This is a chariot temple, upper part is destroyed. And then based on the past literature, architectural principles, the lost part was hypothesized. And then we can have a visual reconstruction of the models of the lost part so that we can have a restoration, but restoration in the digital space, which is more conjectural, and also it enables us to at sometimes appreciate the beauty of the construction even when it is not there in this form. So if you see, this is a picture of the same chariot when it was taken in early 18th century, early 19th century. And this is what is existing today. And the digital twin of it provides us to even complete the top upper part and have an experiential observation of what used to be when it was constructed. Next, with these, we can also experience various other parts of it. Say, for example, this same temple has got musical pillars. Today, you cannot approach the musical pillars and you cannot really play a music on those musical pillars. But when we had created a digital twin and using kind of an haptic interface, we created a mechanism by which a user can get the similar experience as that of playing music on those pillars, but not being actually touching those pillars. So therefore, experiencing of the heritage in digital domain adds additional dimension. Another example is that of these mural paintings. Mural paintings follows a pretty complex grammar and a layout structure. And these are actually painted. This is an example where the painting is in the upper ceiling, in the ceiling of the temple, and it's very difficult to observe from the ground and follow the grammar and get the story. And therefore, we created an interface by which that entire story was represented and laid out, and a navigational space was created in the digital domain so that you can really understand and get the story. So this was all part of a digital twin. If you see, there's a whole story and the sequences and the different characters being identified, and it was digital annotation of murals by experts, enhances the experience. We also worked with the Kiradu group of temples. Kiradu temples are a group of ruined Hindu temples, and we worked on those. This is of a site which is not so popular, but we worked on it to make sure that this can be preserved in digital domain. I'm just giving some quick examples. This is a digital recreation and restoration of temples of Bishnupur, which is actually terracotta temples, and even using generative AI, some of these artifacts have been restored to a fullness so that now you can experience them in a much better way. If you look into it, this is an example of the chariot where we inferred the grammar through ML, and therefore we got the architectural grammar of that chariot that we talked about and established the consistency of the reconstructions. This is on Majuli Island, is the largest river island, and using basically a 360-degree images, we created a digital twin, and you can actually see the entry to it and the space and the living space, the temples, the traditional spaces of that place. And this is an experience which you can have, which is completely image-based and presenting the whole thing in the 3D domain. This is creation of digital twin of Kiradu, and where we have created the parts of it of the broken space. And if you see here, the interesting part of it is conjectural generative AI combining text and archaeological samples is what we are working on. So therefore, the digital space can be enhanced space in various ways. So the conclusions is creating digital twin of heritage sites enables digital preservation, translocated phygital and digital mixed reality experiences, digital rights, and better management and preservation through connected data analytics. And this is a viable technology for active intervention, which is available and deployable. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. This was really mesmerizing, and I feel many of us would have gotten lost over there looking at those visuals. Thank you for sharing, sir. I'm now going to invite Dr. David Tickett, who's a Senior Conservation Scientist, Collections Conservation with English Heritage. And I'm very pleased to also share that he has very recently been awarded 2023 Marsh Award for Research in Conservation by ICON, who are UK's main professional body for conservation. Congratulations, David, and over to you for presentation.
Thank you. And I'm just, there we go, trying to remember how to share the relevant bit of my screen, which I've now done. And thank you for the kind invite to talk today. And hopefully I'll stay on time. So I'm going to talk about improving sustainability for conservation processes at English Heritage. And just quickly, English Heritage is a charity that is charged with caring for 420 sites across England. We're not international like within the UK, at least, but like the Trust. And we care for a very wide range of different building types. But my team's particularly charged with caring for the collection, which is well over 1 million objects that are split between 115 sites across England. And my team consists of 4 scientists, 1 trainee scientist. We're involved in 5 PhDs at the moment. And we also are an independent research organisation, as Nigel mentioned. And recently we've been awarded quite a large grant to develop our laboratory and equipment, which gives us a lot more abilities than we had previously. So what I'm going to mainly talk about today is preventive conservation, which is the focus of our research. And in the past, between 10 and 13 years, depending when you want to start the counting, we've managed to reduce our energy use and carbon footprint for providing environments to look after the collection by at least 40%. And we've done this through a number of actions, which also are major research themes. The first one is understanding the exact conditions we need to achieve for a particular group of objects, such as ivories or tapestries, and also understanding the conditions we require for a particular object by analysis. And I'll explain what this means a little bit into the presentation. Understanding and improving the performance of our mitigation measures, and where we've got active control using machines or heating or cooling, having better controls on that, those machines. And also we've largely moved 10, 15 years ago, most of our properties had comfort heating. We've largely now moved to humidistatic heating or adaptive ventilation, which is possibly more relevant in the more southerly parts of the world. So just some examples. If you look in the scientific literature for archaeological iron conservation, you will see authors say that if you keep your iron below these different values of RH, it will be safe, which is not desperately useful. And if we look at the carbon footprint of keeping a group of iron in a showcase with silica gel at these RH values, you can see it dramatically increases as the RH drops. So knowing which of those values to choose is really important and quite confusing with the literature, but we've done a lot of work to figure out what the risk is as we start to exceed certain values. And just to show a couple of examples, the red line is the risk for archaeological copper as the RH increases, and below 28%, it will not corrode. As we go slightly higher, it corrodes, but very, very slowly. There's quite a big jump at 35%. And then as we get into higher RHs, it really does speed up as a process. And we get this really invasive bronze disease, which has caused pitting in the coin on the right. Another example is the splitting of archaeological bone artifacts if they get too dry. And the black line shows the dimensional change of pieces of archaeological bone. And you can see the slope is very shallow, down to about 25%, and then it begins to get much steeper. And this risk-based approach helps us a lot with designing environments. But that's for groups of objects. Now, if we consider individual objects, if we look at something like archaeological iron, which we have a lot of, on display, about 60% of our archaeological iron is actually insensitive to relative humidity. It follows the green line. It will not be damaged no matter what we do with it, at least in terms of relative humidity. Most of the rest of the iron follows the red line, well over 90%, and we tend to keep our showcases below 30% RH, and we can consider showcases where we can't do that with this VISC isotherm. A very small proportion follow the purple line and they're more reactive, and we need to keep the showcases below 20%, which is possible, but much more intensive in both staff time, costs, and carbon footprint. But the question is, how do we decide which of these behaviors a particular piece of iron falls into? And we've developed a method measuring the oxygen depletion rate. We enclose our iron object in a airtight container with some silica gel at 3 different relative humidities, measure the oxygen concentration in that container with some equipment that was developed about 10 years ago. If it doesn't drop, we know it's not, the iron is not reacting. And being able to do that has helped us a lot on display with whether showcases need silica gel or not. And then moving on to the methods, we've done a lot of work recently looking at the performance of showcases, and we now understand which parameters are really needed to enable it to perform if we try and dry it with silica gel, such as the top left, or with machines, the bottom left. And we have a lot of historic showcases as well, over 180, that we would not want to replace, so we need to know how to improve them. Nigel's mentioned about rooms and humidistatic heating. We also have a lot of material in storage, and we've done a lot of work on designing the stores in a way that they don't need a lot of conditioning. And where they are conditioned, we're using the dehumidifiers like the bottom right, that we know is the most effective and efficient dehumidifier for doing that work. Okay. Just very quickly to show this, I'm not going to talk about detail. This slide shows a scheme for understanding silver tarnish, where we can estimate the rate in a particular room. We've done it a lot across the UK, but you can do this anywhere in the world. couple that with a cleaning threshold to say, I'm going to need to clean this silver every 5 years in that room. The right-hand side shows the impact of using showcases with pumps or lacquer or filtering the room. And then at the bottom, we know how often we'll need to clean, or we can predict how often we'll need to clean the silver in each of those different instances. And then we can look at the actual conservation treatments and carbon footprint. And that brings me nicely onto a project we're involved at the moment. This is a European Horizon project, which is a big research project. And we're looking at green methods for preventive conservation, but also for cleaning and stabilizing materials, looking at metal and painting here. And for the stabilization, silica-based nanoparticles that are tunable for stabilizing glass, and microbes that have been selected so as they can stabilize archaeological iron and copper. And that is a very large project. There are 17 partners. It's 4 years worth of research. They're spread across 12 countries across the EU, and we've been involved in 3 projects like that previously, but we're always open for collaboration, and we believe our research is much better when we do collaborate. And this map just shows the places that we've had research collaborations with, and the red dots show where we've had exchange of staff to learn new skills, new methods, which is always very important. And I'm just going to finish off with a little bit about how we've been feeding into policy in some ways, I suppose, because the UK doesn't have a lot of policy to do with conservation of cultural heritage as such, or the methods that we're talking about, environmental. But we have been involved in drafting and writing a lot of European standards. The top one, which deals with using keeping an object in its historic environment to minimize damage, which is also, as it happens, is often very energy efficient. 2 standards to do with showcases, one on general aspects and a second that will hopefully appear in the next few months about the technical aspects. And much of our research on showcases has fed into them. We've been involved in redrafting a standard called ASHRAE, which is very widely used in air conditioning. And we've also helped with a forthcoming conservation statement on the environment between ICON and the heads of UK conservation. And I think that's probably a good point for me to finish.
Thank you, David. That was really helpful. And I would definitely like to see a dot on India as well very soon, to see that UK and India are working together. In fact, a lot of what Professor Shinde mentioned, I'm not sure whether you were there with us when he was talking about it, otherwise I can put you in touch with him. He was talking a lot about capacity and skilling, and that's what we have also, touched upon in your presentation. So look forward to supporting this collaboration. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
I'm now going to invite Mr. Ankit Jahangir, who is a team lead and head of projects with Vizara Technologies. Ankit is actually standing up for Ms. Anupama Malik, but we are glad you're able to join us, Ankit. Over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. And I'm really glad to present here and represent Anupama Malik. And like there are so many key experts here, so I'm really honored to be here. So quickly, I will show you a presentation, and then just give me 1 second. Yeah. So I hope everyone can see my presentation. Yeah. Okay. So basically today I'm very excited to present about what are the cutting edge innovations in science and technologies which are helping helping to preserve our culture, art, and heritage. And today, basically, it has a very brief snapshot of what I will cover in the presentation. So it's like then I will quickly introduce the Vizara, and then I will explore the key technologies which are helping in this domain, and I will go through with the role of AR, VR, MR in heritage preservations, and obviously then 3D printing also. And then later on, I will also cover the basic pipeline of digital documentation and I will give you few examples of the heritage sites that we have covered so far. And also, I will also share some of the collaborative efforts because of which, we are kind of, we successfully managed to digitally preserve the sites. And I will conclude with a very small statement. Yeah. So Vizara Technologies is a tech startup that uses AR, VR, MR, and 3D printing to preserve and disseminate the vibrant Indian heritage and culture. And we have implemented projects with various prestigious organizations and recognized as a startup by DPIIT. Our vision is to lead in a new age science and technology for the heritage domain. Okay, when we talk about the new tech, so we are really talking about the four big areas: augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and 3D printing. Basically, these technologies help us digitalize, analyze, and recreate our heritage sites. So we'll discuss each of these areas and see how they're helping us to do this. And basically, these technologies have a very critical role in heritage preservations. For example, creating immersive experiences that breathes into life, that they breathe life into the culture heritage. They provide opportunity for the walkthrough of heritage sites and the demonstrating artifact restorations. And I believe Professor Santanu Chaudhary has already given an example of the how artifact restorations can be done. An example of, again, I will take one example for each technologies. So for example, if I take an example of AR, so we have created Rani Ki Vav Science ARR, which is a e-learning ARF for heritage art and science, which allow users to explore art, architecture, and science while exploring the Rani Ki Vav. So here quickly, very small video so that you can get an idea of what is the app about. So basically, it's a very simplified model of the Rani Ki Vav, and you can zoom in, zoom out, you can explore the surroundings. And we have incorporated very few science concepts related to art, science, and architecture. And you can see what is the inside architecture of the Rani Ki Vav model, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Patan, Gujarat. And students, can learn about very basic concept of, let's say, related to the water. So for this, I will cover in the next slides. Okay. And now if for virtual reality, we have developed so many immersive experiences. So I'll take an example of Hazarama Temple, which brings the rich architectural beauty of this historic site to life. So you can get a glimpse of how any virtual reality tour of a monuments looks like. You can use this controller to point out the location where you want to teleport. So it's very interesting concept of Hazarama Temple that on the walls of Hazarama, each panel depicts a very specific story of Ramayana. So using these technologies, we can tell this story to the, let's say, new youth. Okay, now moving on to the mixed reality. So mixed reality experiences, we have combined the AR, VR, MR, and even artificial intelligence, AI, and 3D printing that offers a unique opportunity to explore the Kashi Vishwanath temple's architecture in a detailed and immersive way. And we have implemented this kind of same platform for multiple, I would say, UNESCO heritage sites also. So please have a look at it and so that you will understand. So you can see here a very large scale 3D printed replica of a monument, and along with the replica, there's a very big screen. And here you can, as a user, you can stand in the front of screen and monument, and you can physically interact with the monument, and you can using the game controller. You also have a very immersive way to explore the complete architecture details and kind of a virtual walkthrough of the complete sites. So along with the 3D printing replica and a walkthrough, we have implemented a small projection mapping so for very immersive experience. We also provided a tablet so a user can select a specific locations because there are multiple shrines in the temple. So they can experience in which area which art is being played. Yeah. So moving on to the 3D printing. So basically 3D printing allows us to recreate physical artifacts with high precision. It is a very powerful tool, especially when dealing with the fragile or damaged artifacts. By creating replicas, we can ensure the preservation of these pieces where while making them, it can be accessible to for the education and research purpose also. So that this, for example, if I created a replica of stone chariot, so it can be given to the heritage sites, education institutions. They can do the research on their architecture and all the details. So I will give you some few of the examples that we have kind of 3D printed. So you can see in the left side there is a real photo of the stone chariot Hampi, and on the right side it's a 15-inch height of true scale replica of stone chariot Hampi, and it's completely 3D printed with FDM technologies. And same you can see an example of a Taj Mahal. So in the left side it's a real photo of Taj Mahal, in the right side a 3D printed replica of it, Taj Mahal. And now if I talk about let's say digital documentation. So basically digital documentation is the key for preservation and conservation of heritage sites. And we have developed a very effective pipeline to digitally documenting the site. Like for example, you can see Hazarma Temple. So we can leverage the technology to capture detailed representation of numerous sites, adding the restoration and maintenance. And here you can see the comprehensive process begins with a laser scanning of the monument. And after the monument is scanned, we can convert the point cloud data to 3D model, and the same 3D model data can be transferred for a textured model of Hazarama Temple, and also the same data we can use for the 3D printing of the model. Now again, to give an example of how many sites that we have covered, so you can see an example of Sun Temple, Konark. So at the end, if you want to see the video, so I will play that. I guess because of lack of the time, I will go very fast here. Yeah. This is an example of Rani Ki Vav. So it's a very immersive walkthrough of the Rani Ki Vav. And you can see how, like at what level we can capture the details for the monument. So this is very screenshot of a kind of a Rani Ki Vav from a well. And again, we also kind of create the same experience for Taj Mahal. And the same earlier you've seen the Hazarama Temple in Hampi and Kashi Vishwanath Temple. So basically, our success has been possible through the collaboration with government organizations like Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Culture, Archaeological Survey of India, and various state governments, and even many academic institutions. So with the help and with their support, has amplified our complete efforts in preserving the India's rich cultural heritage, basically. So in closing, I want to say that cutting-edge technologies are offering a powerful tool for preserving and sharing our cultural heritage. They not only help us document and restore the artifacts and site, but they also allow us to create immersive and engaging experiences for everyone to appreciate our shared history. And thank you everyone for your time. So I would be happy to answer any questions if anyone has. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ankit. So many amazing examples. In fact, I have a colleague who's ready to go to Hampi right now, having seen all the amazing visuals that you and others have shown. So we will definitely come back with some feedback. And it's amazing job that you are all doing. Well done for that. I'm now very happy to pass on the mic to Pranav as well as Sarah for sharing their concluding remarks and also way forward. How do we take it forward? Over to you, Sarah and Pranav. Thank you.
Thanks, Shivani. Hopefully you can hear me.
Thank you, Shivani.
I'll let Pranav go first because I feel like I've taken up quite a lot of airtime. Over to you, Pranav.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we decided to organize this wonderful webinar. There's certainly great perspectives that have been shared. Yeah, I was particularly moved about the kind of things that people are doing across both in India and all in the UK. What is essential at this moment is I think we build better bridges between disciplines. And I think some of that has already been illustrated by the kind of work that people have been doing here. I would like to thank all our speakers from both India and UK who've joined us. And some of us will meet again in Bhopal, where we are hosting the Science 20 meeting on connecting science with society and culture. And we'll take these conversations forward from there. I've done our notes from these conversations, and we'll take the conversation further in the meeting. Thank you. Over to Sarah.
Thanks, Pranav. So I've been, as I said, furiously scribbling all afternoon and very grateful, as we've just said, to all of the speakers. And particularly, yeah, I was just talking to Shivani about being transported back to Hampi, which is such a wonderful site to visit. So that's really brought back some strong memories. I think I've absorbed everything, and I think we can proceed under three main themes. I think there's principles that the group have set out today, and everyone's from a real cross-disciplinary set of backgrounds, but I think there are certain things that have united everybody. Things like simple devices, use of simple devices and focus on low-cost innovations, making those very engaging. I think Helen and Catherine talked at the beginning about science capital and the good citizenship principle, and I think that's also of interest. And using what we're doing to boost confidence in participation. Catherine termed it really well, you know, the right to experience awe and wonder. So I thought that was a really good soundbite. And obviously promoting team science, not one man or one woman. I think, you know, some of the vaccine stories were really fantastic in that regard. There's no lone genius. So I think we can capture that well. And I think the opportunity to demonstrate interconnectivity, both between the different actors that are involved in presenting a story through the museums and initiatives that everybody's pushing forward, and also really centralizing the people in these stories and making sure that the people stories are central to navigating concerns and activities. I think moving on from the principles, we've got consensus. Culture is everything. I think that was something that particularly resonated with me that Professor Sharma mentioned, but also science is part of culture. And I think Helen really reinforced that. I think there's consensus that the work that we do can equip citizens with the capability and capacity to make decisions about their own lives. So I think that's something that was resonating through the different talks today. And then we zoomed really quite far into specific sectors and areas like AI and NFTs. They seem to be on everyone's minds. So that's definitely a point of consensus there. And lastly in this, I think, it was interesting talking about the channels between the actors. And I think particularly around the scientists' channel with archaeologists in particular, that kind of came through and that application angle, so making the connects there in the best way that we can, and perhaps there's some exchange of information and expertise on that front. So what do we do next? I think Pranav's talked about the S20 summit and moving towards that, and we've got a really fantastic agenda that we can all participate in there. But beyond that, I think there's a group of challenges and themes that have really been drawn out today. The digital divide, I think, is something that everybody feels quite passionate about. So I think there's something that we can all work together there on. Preserving the heritage of the future. I thought that was a really good point by Janavi at the beginning. So thinking about how digital will travel, that just blew my mind. I hadn't thought about that before. So I think that's definitely something that unites everybody. And then I think there's real ripe territory for ideas exchange within the group. There's a million examples that we've given today that have been fantastic around how to make science fun and engaging, use of AI, programming and how that's done well, and how I think people are participating within that. I think something around coordination of different actors in the field and how that's done well. And also within that, dissemination and education. And then the themes that came through very strongly for me are sustainable development, intelligent machines, AI, climate change. So we'll capture all of this, but I'm wondering if we can collect some case studies between now. I'm always one to set a challenge, so Shivani's very aware of this. I'm wondering if we can collect some case studies from the talk that we've had today and just capture those as a starter for 10, so we can work on that alongside the reports, capture all of the key moments and things that people have said, articulated today, and then move towards the S20 and go from there. So I think I'm just going to hand over the floor on that note back over to Shivani, just to close the proceedings. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Pranav. I think we have had really amazing discussions, and like Sarah said at the in the beginning, this is a new track which we are aiming to build between UK and India, and a very interesting track. We are all ready to work on it. So as a next step, if all the presenters can please email their presentations either to me or INSA colleagues from whom they received their invitation, I think that would be most helpful. And we will put together a small report putting together the main salient points which were shared, the main challenges, areas of cooperation, and circulate it to the participants. And then hopefully we'll try and reconvene again in either August or September for a second version, maybe exploring future of museums kind of a theme, and remain in touch with each other because we will need everybody's ideas to see how we want to nurture this particular track. But I would like to close by saying thank you so much for your amazing presentations and devoting so much time to this theme. It just says how important this is for each and every one of us. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening, afternoon to UK and India colleagues. Thank you.
See you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.